David Chilton is the author of the personal finance classic, The Wealthy Barber. And he agrees with the idea that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world.
The best analogy, the best visual is the snowball rolling down the hill. You know, it's got the traction, it's picking up more snow as it goes, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it's huge compared to where it started out.
Huge money snowballs, rolling our way, paying for our retirements. The Wealthy Barber says that can be ours, but we need to start socking away cash. Starting when? Right now. Hi, I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Welcome to The Cost of Living. David Chilton self-published The Wealthy Barber back in 1989. It turned into the top-selling personal finance book in Canadian history. Now, he and his barber Roy are back with a new book. Later in the show, we talk to him about what's changed in the last 3 decades and see if he thinks we can still save our way to the good life. Turns out that's what a lot of 20-somethings want to do right now. They want to build wealth, and they're investing. But they're doing it in a way that could make a financial advisor shudder. Their strategy for stock picking is just vibes. Up first, buying Canadian at the grocery store for a lot of people is an easy decision. So it bumps up your bill by a couple bucks. Worth it. But what if you're spending $1 billion? Leah Hendry, when you're out shopping these days, are you peering at labels more than you used to? Are you picking up a jar of pickles looking for made in Canada?
Yeah, definitely when I'm buying strawberries.
I don't think you're alone in that.
I just talked to a guy who sees people doing that every day. Ismail Boumediene sells produce at a popular farmer's market in Montreal. And these days, he says his customers always ask him where stuff comes from. And if he says it's American,
sometimes they just put it back. Sometimes they didn't even say a word. They just go. And sometimes they, oh, why you sold that? Why after all of this?
So Ismail's getting grilled.
They're on his case for sure. And before I chatted with Ismail, I wandered around the market to see how people were feeling. They're still not happy with the U.S. and tariffs. People I talked to were buy Canadian across the board. If this country is building something big, infrastructure projects, ships, high-speed rail, they want to see it done here.
It's about time that we stand up and do our own and encourage our own economy.
We reap the rewards when we invest back in Canada with more jobs.
Well, they should be putting in rules that the content, should be more Canadian.
So those people at least are like, heck yeah, Canada.
They are, and surveys show Canadians want this country supporting homegrown businesses, and they want Canada to be more economically independent.
Sure, but a lot of people are also just, feeling feelings about how we're being treated by the White House.
Sure, but when those feelings run into economic realities, sometimes things can get bumpy. Look at what happened with BC Ferries. It's ordered 4 brand new ships. It went through a 5-year procurement process. But back in the summer, it came out that they had bought these vessels from a Chinese shipyard. And almost immediately, the news became a political hot potato.
I share the concern, the anger of other members of this House about the purchase of Chinese ferries. We owe it to the people of BC.
I like to think I'm pretty good at who's that cabinet minister. I want to say that's Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, that's right. That's the former transport minister speaking in the House of Commons. This whole ferry thing became quite awkward for the government, both in BC and for the feds.
Because they picked a Chinese shipyard.
Yeah, but their bid was more than $1 billion less than the nearest bids. It also promised to deliver the ferries at lightning speed, some before the end of the decade.
But what about Canadian shipbuilders? Where were they in all this?
None of them bid on the project.
Why not?
Seaspan, which is a shipbuilder on the West Coast, it's fully booked building ships for the Coast Guard and the Canadian Navy. The Davie shipyard in Quebec, it did have room to build the ferries, but both companies said there was no way they could compete on the price. The CEO of BC Ferries says buying Canadian would have cost way more and could have taken up to a decade longer. Either it was foreign-made ships or nothing.
That kind of choice used to be kind of like, okay, well, we need to buy a foreign ship, whatever. Not anymore.
Yeah, things have changed fast. There's a lot of pressure on governments to buy domestically. Eric McNeely is with the BC Ferry and Marine Workers Union, and he's got a petition going around called Build Them Here, encouraging people to write to their MLA or MP.
Yeah, that makes sense. He's a union guy and he's going to bat for his members.
Yeah, he's tired of this being about just the bottom line. He doesn't want to see these jobs go overseas. Eric knows labor costs are higher in Canada. So are environmental standards. But
we're claiming that short-term savings override long-term self-reliance, which I think we're re-looking at as a country right now based on our trade relationship with the neighbors to the south of us. So we need to shift the conversation from just price to value.
Okay, value, but by that he means
jobs, not just now, but for years to come. We need to build these industries domestically, and he thinks Canadians need these skills. Dollars and cents shouldn't be the only consideration.
So the argument he's making here is as much strategic as it is economic.
Yeah, and this conversation is happening around the country. About an hour away from Quebec City, they're building a huge wind farm. It's going to cost several $billion, and a huge chunk of the turbine towers are coming from Asia and are made with Chinese steel. When that news came out, the opposition here in Quebec was like, how can you say you support the local economy and buy Chinese steel?
But the rationale here, I would guess, much like BC Ferries, is, hey, we're just looking at the cost.
Yeah, China produces about half of all the steel in the world right now. The amount it pumps out has exploded in the last decade.
Around 7 to 10 years ago, they didn't make enough steel for their market, but they had tons of infrastructure projects and they built tons of steel mills. They really stepped up, spent a tremendous amount of money on China, and now they're an exporter.
Brad Beauchamp runs Global Stainless and Aluminum in Ontario. It buys and distributes metal around the world. And he says when it comes to China, nobody can compete on price.
Generally, I would say it's 20 to 40% cheaper. On some items, they're going to be 50% cheaper. You can actually buy steel from China, include all of the tariffs that the countries have laid on there, because it's so cheap, add the tariffs on and still sell it for a small profit in other countries.
He says because of government subsidies and low labor costs, China is able to undercut everybody.
And this is where things get real for Buy Canadian, because we still live in a global world and we still want to save money if and where we can.
Well, sometimes what we want and what we're willing to pay, they just don't fit together. That's what Francois Neville says. He teaches management at McMaster University. Francois says suddenly trying to find ways to buy Canadian, it's not an easy pivot.
I think it would be unrealistic to expect a huge uptick in fully produced Canadian materials or products that go towards large infrastructure projects, as nice as that might be. And in theory, it might be possible, but it would be probably so expensive to do it and would take such a long time to do it that it's not necessarily clear that that would be in the best interest of the Canadian general public.
So then where does that leave Canada and Buy Canadian?
Well, Francois thinks we can still find a way to buy more Canadian and reduce our dependence on the United States. We can't provide everything that's needed for every project, but we can lean into what we already do well and make sure some of what we make is used in those really big contracts.
For instance, ferries would have to use, X percentage of Canadian steel. They would have to employ X percentage of Canadian workers. I think that that's probably the direction this would head.
So he's saying Buy Canadian-ish.
Yeah, some rather than all. We saw some of this in the federal budget, especially on defense spending. When the military buys equipment, the government wants as much of it as possible to be made in Canada.
So if we go buy new submarines for like $100 billion, whatever country we buy them from, we want them to include Canadian components. We want the maintenance done here, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and for the really big stuff, that's what Buy Canadian could look like. But Francois says if that's the way we end up going, the government still needs to be transparent about the costs.
So people won't be shell-shocked when they see the bill?
Yeah, he thinks people need to understand what the trade-offs will be. But Union Rep Eric McNeely, He thinks that those trade-offs are worth it. Eric wants to see more stuff built here, and he thinks we also have the talent to pull it off.
We've done massive national projects. On the West Coast, we had the Coquihalla major highway in British Columbia washout. People said, it's going to take forever to fix. It was months, and it was back up. Everyone thought it couldn't be done. So there's a willingness in Canada to do these things if we're willing to say that we're going to do it, and it can't just be the bottom dollar.
You can hear what he's arguing for there, but the bottom dollar has really been the decisive factor in a lot of decisions for a long, long time, Leah.
And shaking that up might not be easy.
All right. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul.
On your Radio NBI podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haavardsrud. If you believe what you see on Instagram, 20-somethings are big on vibes. They want good vibes only at work. They like those cool 90s retro vibes. And when it comes to the stock market, what's their investing strategy? Yeah, you guessed it. Sometimes it's just vibes.
Saul Oster is a university student in Kelowna, and when he's not in class or studying, he's watching the markets.
If you've ever been to Boston Pizza and that robot has come and delivered your food, that company I'm invested pretty heavily in.
Saul is 20 years old. He doesn't have a lot of money to invest, but it's something he's really into, and so are most of his friends.
Young people, and young men especially, are just inherently into gambling. The idea of making money without doing actual physical or mental work is extremely appealing.
Saul likes to think he's a smart gambler. He does do his research before picking stocks. But sometimes
We'll be sitting around at dinner talking about this kind of thing, and just someone will tell you to buy something and you'll buy it. No research whatsoever, just a pure gut feeling.
a lot of young Canadians say they also go with their gut. A recent CIBC survey of Gen Zs and millennials found that when it comes to investing, nearly half say they rely less on data and more on instinct. Andrew Aziz says that can be risky. He's the Vancouver-based founder of Bear Bull Traders, an online trading community.
The new generation are trading based on what is trendy, what is hot, what is the hype.
They're influenced by what they see on social media. Things like penny stocks and crypto. There's a lot of crazy stuff out there.
So now I'm invested in Fartcoin, and I think that is just hilarious.
The name is really Fartcoin. You know, it created as a joke. But people would buy that, and then it goes down, and they think, oh, it's going to go back up. No, that one may never come back up again.
In Canada, Gen Z is investing more consistently than any other age group, partly because it's so quick and easy. You no longer have to go to the bank and fill out a ton of paperwork to start trading. You just need to download an app on your phone.
It's essentially the same as online shopping. You just log in on your phone, put in the ticker code, buy what you want to buy, and it takes 5 minutes.
Liz Enriquez is a personal finance mentor in Hamilton and the founder of Ambitious Adulting. She says young Canadians understand the power of compound interest. They know it's smart to start investing early.
You have to invest to get ahead. Like, there is no way you can just save anymore and buy a house or save and be successful.
But investing on gut instinct, that's not something she advises her clients to do. Then again, your gut isn't always wrong.
If you need to scratch that itch and you're able to afford, $1,000 or $100 to just be like, let me just follow this feeling and see where this goes. That's a risk that I take.
And if you're going to take a risk, Liz says better to do it when you're young and you have many years of investing ahead of you.
it's a rite of passage. So just do it once or twice because you want to get it out of your system. You learn the hard way and you're like, okay.
Saul Oster is feeling good about his investing strategy. 80% of his portfolio is made up of what he calls the most bland ETFs known to man. The rest is set aside for a little vibe investing. And things are going pretty well.
It's up a decent amount, but that in no way means that it'll stay like that. In fact, it's lost a lot today.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
In Canada, a book is considered a bestseller if it moves 5,000 copies. What do you call one that sells more than 2 million? I don't know, but we can ask David Chilton. He self-published The Wealthy Barber back in 1989, and it sold like financially prudent hotcakes. The book follows a barber named Roy. He doles out personal finance advice while cutting hair. Now Roy, in an updated version of the book, is back with some new advice. David Chilton, hi.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be on. I really am.
Well, thanks for being here. And I don't know what they call a book that sells 2 million copies. I'm curious, though, what does your accountant call that?
My parents called a complete fluke. That's for sure. I remember my dad saying, you're going to be a one-hit wonder, but that's one hit more than we thought you'd have. So I think that tells you where he sits. So yeah, I mean, who could have known? When I wrote the book, my dream was to sell 10,000 copies. And the first year it sold maybe double that, a little bit more, and was slowing down at Christmas. And then for whatever reason, word of mouth took off in year 2 and it went ballistic. And the rest is history, as they say. So, who knew? It was just a lucky stroke to put it in the barber shop. The funny thing is the original idea, when I decided to put it in novel format, was set in a bar. It was called The Wealthy Bartender. And I got the idea watching Cheers. But then because you want it to be realistic, you're involving alcohol and people trying to pick each other up and bar fights, and it got convoluted and too much. And so I moved it over to the barber shop, and that seemed to be something people could relate to.
Well, the big idea in your original book was pay yourself first. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, my whole argument was all the other books, and I agreed with most of what the other books were teaching on the personal finance front, but disagreed that budgeting was the way to go to try to save money, because I'd watched so many people try and fail, like we all do when we're trying to lose weight, et cetera. Human nature comes in and sabotages our efforts. So my argument was, don't go that route. If you need to save 10 to 15% of your income, let's take it off the top of the paycheck through pre-authorized checking, payroll deduction, and then spend the rest of the money. And for a long time, I think that advice was rock solid on its own and helped a lot of people. Admittedly, as the decades went by, it was a little less effective because credit became ubiquitously available. And so people were still paying themselves first and taking the 10 and 15% and putting it in a TFSA and RSP, whatever, but they were building up the debt on the other side through credit cards, lines of credit, and so on and so forth. So now that approach for saving still works, but it has to be complemented by more spending discipline, and that's addressed pretty aggressively in the revised version of The Wealthy Barber.
One of the things you say in the original book, and you talk about it a lot, and eloquently, really passionately in the new book, is the idea of compound interest. If you could just pull out one thing about compound interest that continues to fascinate you, what would that be?
Well, I'm so lucky because I'm on the receiving end of a lot of people's success stories. They will send them off to us and say, look, I started with 100 a month, 400 a month, 800 a month. And, in the early years, it grew very, very slowly. And then it hit an inflection point where it did start compounding, where 1 year it went up by way more than I was adding in new savings. Then they got excited. Then they started saving even more often. And then it takes off from there. It really is the eighth wonder of the world. And the best analogy, the best visual is the snowball rolling down the hill. It's got the traction. It's picking up more snow as it goes. And by the time it gets to the bottom, it's huge compared to where it started out. That's something we have to drive forward. When we talk about educating in the high school system, educating in the college and university system, it's those basics, the power of compounding. Pay yourself first. It's those things we need to teach first. Stay away from the tricky stuff. If some people want to take advanced courses on option trading and all those things, I don't necessarily advise it, but go ahead. For the masses, it's understanding these 3, 4, 5, 6 basic principles and just how do I apply them? How do I stick to them? How do I fight off human nature? This is what it's all about.
Well, give me an example using some real dollars. Pick a dollar amount, pick a time frame, 7 years, 14 years, 21 years. What does compound interest look like?
Well, I mean, I've seen so many, but I saw one the other day where the husband-wife team together was saving 600-ish a month. It was a little bit less than that for some reason. Using TFSAs only started about 15 years ago, and they were up to $250,000. Now, the markets have been quite strong, and so that certainly has helped them during that process. But remember, they aren't at year 20, 25, 30, and 35 when you can really see it start to go ballistic. And what's more, in that particular example they sent me, they hadn't added to the amount. And there's an example like that in the revised version of the book and lots of other compounding examples. The good thing about them is people find them very inspiring. They see that it's not a huge amount being set aside, that you're not doing a lot here. Like, I'm not asking people to pick and choose the individual stocks. Let's be honest, most people aren't going to do it. And if they do it, they'll be bad at it. We're talking about just placing the money in index funds, staying detached and paying. In fact, the less attention they pay, often the better it turns out. So the power of all of this is quite remarkable, but I'm the first to admit it all starts with you got to set aside the money.
Since you've seen so many spending summaries over the years, are there through lines for people who are doing things right or people who are making mistakes? Anything that stands out to you? You would say, oh, you know what? This is something people do.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's one that if you talk to any financial expert in Canada and the States, I think they'd all say this: we spend too much on cars. And obviously, there are people listening to this show who are exceptions to the rule, but a tremendous number of people, an unfortunate percentage of people, spend too big a percentage of their income on cars. And in fact, in some instances, it's blocking them from doing the right thing even more than the high cost of real estate. I would argue it's a bit odd now where younger Canadians are making the valid point that it's tougher than ever because of real estate prices, because of the cost of living. You'd think in that environment, we would cut back as a percentage of our spending of our income on cars. It hasn't gone that way. Some of that's because cars themselves have become more expensive. They've risen at a greater than CPI rate over the last several years. But a lot of it is we love cars and we define ourselves by our cars to some extent. They very much are part of our personal brand image. And a lot of people overspend in that area.
Well, I got to ask, what do you drive?
I drive a Jeep and it's got 100,000 kilometers on it. I'm not a big spender, but the funny thing is I'm not thrifty. Like I give a lot of my money away, but I live in a small house. My house is 1,300 square feet. I love small homes. It's one of the things I talk about in the updated version of the Wealthy Barber. I tend to just, like hobbies that don't cost that much. I love reading. I love following my fantasy pools and all those types of things. So I pretty much practice what I preach in the books with maybe one or two exceptions.
Well, since you published the original book in 1989, what do you think has changed the most in the world of personal finance?
Well, there are a lot more products now. And so rewriting the book, instead of just having to talk about RSPs as a container for your investments that was tax advantaged, now we've got TFSAs. Now we've got first home savings accounts. And of course, in the investment arena, you've got ETFs and products that weren't available when the original book came out. And as mentioned earlier, we not only have to teach what those various accounts are, what those various products are, but how do you prioritize? Which one makes the most sense in your circumstances?
We talked about some of the things that have changed since the original book came out and what's happening now in 2025. But of course, in Canada, something that matters to almost everyone is the increase in house prices. Do you think that what's happening with house prices, especially for younger people who are really some of the biggest targets for your book, does that make financial planning harder or easier?
It's hard. It's harder for sure. And the baby boomers who dispute that don't get it. They'll often come back and say it's always been hard. We strained to buy our first house. Our expectations were lower. There's some truth to that, by the way. A lot of the younger home buyers' expectations are a little higher than previous generations. But all of that being said, it's harder now. Just look at the basic arithmetic, but especially on the down payment front. Holy smokers. I mean, if you look in Toronto, you look in Vancouver, you look in Calgary, Edmonton, whatever, you could be looking at an $800,000 starter home in Toronto, for heaven's sakes. Well, if you're going to try to hit the 20% mark, that's $160,000 down payment. Try saving that after tax. And this is why, unfortunately, the most important advice in Canada has become choose your parents wisely. And we do not want that being the most important advice. We want people to be able to afford a home and not just afford the mortgage payment, but to be able to buy the home and still save to the appropriate level. And therefore, these home prices really have caused a lot of challenges for people. In many areas, they've pulled back over the last 6 months and a year. It's made it a little bit easier, especially with interest rates being still historically at low levels. But it is tough, and the down payment challenge is a very legitimate gripe by people.
Yeah, you said you're a little older now. You were 27 when you wrote the original book. You are, I'm going to say, I'm looking at you right now. You look great. I'm going to say you're a little more seasoned. Why don't we say that?
Thank you.
If you were sitting down with Roy, the wealthy barber, because you have more gravitas now than you did back then, would you have any advice for Roy?
No, not really. I mean, it's funny, but even in the writing of the original book, I had Roy give some opinions that were a little bit different than my own. And here's the crazy thing. My alter ego ended up being sharper than I did. So for example, in the original book, he was a big fan of spending summaries. My own voice came through one of the characters and was like, I'm really probably not going to fill all that information in. Let's be honest. I think this is a waste of time. Well, I've never been more wrong. Over the years, I've seen the huge benefit that doing a spending summary can have for people. And so, no, there's not a lot I could say to Roy. I think that he seems sharper than his creator. I would definitely say that.
All right, then, would you tell Roy anything about how Roy has changed your life?
Well, I mean, obviously for me, very lucky. I mean, it was such a huge success and it opened up so many doors for me. I wouldn't have been a dragon had it not been for the success of the Wealthy Barber. And really, I mean, I'm always kind of shaking my head and saying, I've really only had one good idea in my life. Thank heavens I had it when I was young because it paved the way for lots of other opportunities.
Well, David Chilton, it was a pretty good idea. Thanks for all that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it.
David Chilton is the author of the new updated Wealthy Barber. Before we go, do you have any questions about business or the economy that have just been kind of bugging you? Well, let us know and we'll try to answer it on a future show. Now, in the past, you've asked questions that cover the waterfront. Heavy stuff like, should we worry about subnational debt? All the way to, why is the rotisserie chicken at the front of the grocery store such a clucking good deal? Now, fortunately, we have a senior poultry reporter standing by to take on all your fowl-related queries. So if you have a question, give us a call. Our number is 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-2678. Or send us an email, costofliving@cbc.ca. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Danielle Nerman, Leah Hendry, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Thanks for listening.